Wait a minute. I'm not gonna like this, am I?
Nope. These videos are not for children. If you are a children, then piss off.
I'm not Dick Grayson. This is Damian Wayne.
Wayne?
His son.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso. And today, I'm here to talk about my least favorite Batman character, Damian Wayne. Now, ever since I started making Batman-related content for the channel, I have made my utter disdain of this character very well known. I answered questions that were never even asked. And you in the comments, you either cheer me on in my adamant hatred of a fictional child, or you condemn me for my alleged bad opinion. And after making several Batman videos where I go completely out of my way to trash a character that's barely related to the topic at hand, oh, actually, now that I think about it, he's fully related to the topic at hand, being that he is the son of Batman. Anyway, after mentioning it so many times, I've only just now realized I've never really fully clarified all of the many reasons I hate this character and see him as complete failure. And now, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. First and foremost, let's start at ground zero. Because I don't only just hate this cartoon child, I hate his panel-to-panel parents as well. Well, together, at least. I'm obviously quite fond of Batman, actually. I have never in my life been a fan, or even just an understanding reader of the whole Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul romance. You know, the pairing never seemed legitimate or natural to me. No matter what the continuity is, it always feels contrived. And I mean this in all forms of Batman media. We're talking the comics, Batman the Animated Series, the Dark Knight trilogy, the Arkham games, everything. I have never liked it. I have never understood it.
Gator, never been about that. Never been about that. You feel me?
The thing is that Batman has been in a lot of interesting ships. Catwoman, Wonder Woman, Zatanna. Talia al Ghul ain't one of them. She doesn't make that list. As a matter of fact, she's on the other list right up there next to Batman/Batgirl. Nuh-uh. No thank you. Don't want any of that. None of it. The relationship, of course, was always going to feel a little bit forced to some degree, because it actually kind of was. The two characters were set up by Ra's al Ghul, Talia's father, and he wanted the two to get together so that Batman could become the heir to the League of Assassins. So yeah, this was very much an attempt at an arranged marriage. I know the writers have written this as the setup, but actually write in that Batman and Talia managed to legitimately fall in love, despite Bruce's better judgment. But that still doesn't really work for me. It just, again, chess pieces falling into place. It's a little bit too convenient. It kind of seems like Talia was groomed to be the suitor of whoever her father chose for her. And being that Bruce is allegedly the world's greatest detective, I would think that he would understand that in full, and would probably feel some type of way about going further with that relationship. That's just me. You know, the whole marry my daughter so then this way you can raise my team of ninjas. It just, for some reason, it just to me kind of invalidates the whole legitimacy behind the whole shipping. Also, these two characters have zero chemistry. And this isn't a performance issue. I'm not talking about a specific set of actors who played these characters. I mean the characters in themselves. They're two separate puzzle pieces that you're trying to connect together, and no matter how much you make the edges jagged, it's not gonna fit the right way you want it to. And at the end of the day, Damian is a sentient reminder of a comic book couple that should have never really been. But then it also becomes this weird chicken and the egg situation here, because I hate Damian more because he's a direct result of Bruce and Talia. But now I hate Bruce and Talia even more because they're responsible for Damian Wayne. You know, where does it really all come from? It's just a giant orb of hatred. Not to mention that it's a little bit questionable just how consenting Damian's conception was. I don't know, whole thing is just bad news to me. I don't like it. His whole birth and the fact that he was essentially a test tube baby who had a short-lived case of Benjamin Button syndrome just feels a little bit too contrived for me. It's a little bit too much. The kid's 4 years old and he's only been alive for 9 months. I can't with this. You see, my brain can accept a man incapable of experiencing normal body heat who also uses a freeze gun, a man with a split personality whose face just so happened to get half disfigured, a mad scientist who transforms himself into a giant fucking bat, a penguin man penguin, and an unidentifiable clown who's immune to death and imprisonment. But rapidly aging children? That's where I draw the line. Despite the fact that plenty of other Batman shows have somewhat worked with this trope, why is this a thing? Like, no, seriously, like, this has happened at least 4 times off the top of my head. In all seriousness, the whole thing just kind of sounds goofy to me. And it's easy to recognize that the reason his story was given these strange details were really just a way of explaining away other inconsistencies. Like birthing Damian from an artificial womb was just an explanation as to why Talia wasn't rocking her baby bump prior to this revelation. Having Damian age up with a Chaos Emerald or whatever the fuck they were using was just writing off why the character was only just showing up or being spoken about now. Since Damian's return to the comics and his resurrection of relevancy, most books kind of set him up as being the one to take over the Bat mantle. And this does not sit well with me. This irritates me quite a lot. I spoke about this not too long ago in my Batman Beyond video, but I hate the idea of a famous character's legacy being taken over by the next of kin following their departure. Like, yeah, sure, that story can be told, and once or twice is kind of nice, but when it's a constant thing, it seems cheap. You know, at the end of the day, you're asking yourself, oh, why is this person the right person for the role? Well, he is his father's kid. That's not a good enough answer. I'm my father's kid, and let me tell you, I could tell you jack shit about plumbing. And I was even a plumber for a short period of time in my life. So, my point is that one doesn't adjust their talents into somebody to create something with similar styles. I'm gonna stop talking. I think I really lost it at so I'm just gonna stop there. Now, granted, Damian does have the training to take on the role, but he doesn't have the right temperament. And I think Bruce himself would probably admit the same, or at least he should. Out of all the Bat family, I'd have to say that either Dick Grayson or Cassandra Cain would probably be the right character to take over such a role. You know, after Bruce hangs the cape up, or is buried in the cowl, whichever comes first. Though Nightwing still definitely shouldn't, but I'm not going to go too far into that one because that's a video for a different day. Damian Wayne as Batman it sounds wrong, and I feel dirty, and I want to shower and cry simultaneously. I remember hearing people losing their goddamn mind when Lucius Fox's other kid was slated to take on the role. He's going to be the Bat of the future. And people went apeshit. And I don't get it, because I would take that dude over the boy Blunder wearing the cowl any day of the week. His speech patterns and way of speaking, they make sense for the character's upbringing. I'm not giving shit to that. As a matter of fact, I'm giving the writers credit. But I also find it unreadable in comics, and I wish it was inaudible in movies, because I can't fucking stand it.
This never-ending mission of ours is a lonely endeavor. If this trollop provides some carnal release, so be it.
The way that he talks, whack!
It doesn't do anything to endear me to the character. As a matter of fact, it puts me off him entirely. I remember watching Death of Superman for the first time, and I was really hyped to see it, as I really enjoy that story. But then Damian Wayne pops up on my screen for a millisecond, and my mood is entirely ruined. I didn't even watch the sequel. I mean, that's unrelated. I haven't found the time, but I like to think, you know, subconsciously, it's because Damian showed up for that millisecond. I don't understand how we live in a world where it was decided that Dawn from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Connor from Angel were irredeemably whiny little brats. And yet here we are celebrating Damian Wayne. And I'm sorry, but let's just get down to it. The most basic thing to say. Damian is fucking annoying. Like how? Just how, actually. I don't have a follow-up sentence. Just how? He's an angry, angsty little twerp who thinks he knows best all the time. What about that makes people go, oh yeah, no, that's the guy I want to see in the Bat Ears. That is a character I want on the cover of my comic book.
'Cause I'm ready to take up the mantle. I'm Batman.
With all that teenage angst, ego, and attitude, this guy just comes off as Diet Jason Todd. I said what I said. Like, no offense to anyone creatively here, but Damian is such a thoughtless creation. How much actual thought and time could have really been devoted to making this character? Like, it probably takes the same amount of creative thought that goes into naming your series something stupid and generic like The Day Blank Died. You know, completely effortless. On top of all that, Damian is ridiculously overpowered. He's kind of a complete Mary Sue. Now granted, they do give reason as to why Damian is as skilled as he is, having both Batman and the Al Ghul's genes and training regimen. And, you know, also he has access to a Lazarus pit, and he was trained since birth by the top assassins in the world. Yes, there's definitely reasoning as to why he could do the things he did. But still, it's kind of way too much and way too soon. Like, it seems like an honest attempt at legitimizing the character, but I have the same problems here that I did with Hush. You're giving somebody too much too soon. Let the audience take a liking, or in my case, disliking to the character before you start giving them the world. Maybe gauge your audience a little bit and try to figure out if this is gonna work. There are things I like about the character. I think he quite possibly has the best character design and attire out of all of the Robins. Of course, when saying this, we're obviously disqualifying Dick Grayson's Elvis phase, because, quite frankly, it would be unfair to include it, and also he was Nightwing when he had it, so. But seriously, I actually think that he has the best Robin design out of all of them. I mean, of course, every Robin design is pretty much an altered variation of the one that came before him, but I genuinely think he looks the coolest out of all of them. Take that for whatever it's worth. And it probably ain't worth much. What I will say is that the New Boy Wonder's compassion for animals and passion for animal rights is probably the most interesting part of him. And I do actually think the fact that he's so disillusioned with people that he has an easier time connecting and protecting animals, it's a pretty interesting development, and it also does a lot to separate him from Robins before him. I do like that writers are actually trying to make him stand out as his own fictional person. But even with that, the best thing about the character is his name. Damian Wayne? Why, that almost sounds like Damon Wayans. And Damon Wayans is the brother of Marlon Wayans, and Marlon Wayans almost played Robin back in Batman and Batman Returns. Oh shit, I did it. 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon minus Kevin Bacon. Now, I won't lie to you and say that there haven't been interesting stories with this character. I do enjoy the mini clone saga thing that they had there. I thought that was kind of cool. I'll even go out of my way and say when the character is aged up, like in the few instances that he's written to be an adult man, he's not as bad. Hell, I'd even say that adult Damian is somewhat tolerable. But he's not often depicted as being a full-grown man. He's usually a child who tries to act like a man and fails at being human. But like I said, even with that aside, even when Damian is an adult, he's not very exciting or interesting to me. He's just tolerable, that's it. Damian Wayne does get good character development, and there is a positive progression there. And yes, it's definitely an improvement, but it's just an improvement. It's still not great for me. Who knows, maybe there will be more developments over time. Maybe there's a story or two I haven't read that will completely reshape my opinion on this character. I would love for that. I know a lot of people think that I want to hate for the sake of hating, but no, I would genuinely like Batman things. So with that being said, if any of you listening have any good suggestions of Damian Wayne content or like a definitive Damian Wayne story that I haven't checked out yet, let me know in the comments section below. I do actually read these things. I'll tell you what, I will pick the top 3 to 5, and then I will go out of my way to check them out. We'll come back to this topic. Anyway, with that being said, I want to thank you guys for joining me here again. Of course, as always, I've been your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I hope to see you in the next one.
Dick Grayson. He was my son.
You don't fool me. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you could be Robin. Well, you can't.
I'm gonna be honest with you, I've yet to see this movie. Actually, come to think of it, outside of Hush and Death of Superman, I haven't seen any of the movies that are tied into this continuity. Half so because of the animation style, because to me it just kind of looks like anime light, and being that I'm not an avid anime fan, it just never seemed all that appealing to me. And the other half of that, because, well, as a lot of you may know, I hate Damian Wayne. I hate his characterization, I hate his character, I hate the relationship that created his character. I do not like this fictional child. If you need me to further elaborate, I've actually made a whole video on this very topic, so feel free to check it out. But all of that changes today, because for the first time ever, I watched Son of Batman. So let's get into it. What is this movie? The League of Assassins is ambushed by one of its own, as Slade Wilson, better known to many as Deathstroke, takes his revenge for not being included in the will. Slade is angered at the fact that Batman's bastard love child will inherit the League over him. Despite his years of hard work and very impressive resume, the guy just can't compete with nepotism. Knowing that his time is up, he decides so is his master's, and takes the life of Ra's al Ghul, killing him so good that even a Lazarus Pit bath can't bring him back. This leads to Talia taking her son to Gotham City to meet his father, the pointed-eared night rat. And when Talia and Bruce reconnect, they reminisce over the time Talia literally, how do I say this without YouTube straight up taking away my potential earnings here? They reminisce over the time Talia raped him. Like, I'm not exaggerating. She straight up says,
Would you like a drink?
Last time that didn't go so well.
Oh, you're right. If I remember correctly, I put a little something in your beverage.
Ha! So you admit it, she admits it.
and listen, if anybody wants to come to the comment section and talk to me about power dynamics here, shut up. This is still problematic any way you spin it. I mean, I know that she's a villain, but, like, I feel like there should be limits to this kind of thing. There's bad, and then there's just distasteful evil. And this is certainly that. And may I just ask, and I've always meant to ask this, but are we really sure this is Batman's kid? I mean, he looks like the spitting image of Batman's adopted son. Are we sure that Talia didn't slip any of the fully grown boy wonders a too? She's clearly not above doing something like that. Talia drops the kid off and dips. And Batman accepts this. But, like, hold on. She admittedly dapes the guy. And then she left him with his unwanted love child, and now it's his responsibility? I mean, that's just kind of unacceptable, ain't it? If I was him, I would ask the kid how old he was before immediately Googling the latest one could get an abortion. I'm just saying, it's worth a look. Like, let's think about this, Bruce. Who really even knows that this kid exists? He probably isn't documented. You could just leave him anywhere. And no one's gonna judge you, let alone me. Especially not me. I'm not gonna... I understand. I just wouldn't suggest dropping him off with anyone because more than likely they would look to return him. Now, I'll be real with you. Up until this point in the movie, I hated everything I saw. As a matter of fact, I was already pre-typing up my closing paragraph about why this movie's terrible. Like, I genuinely dislike the vast majority of it, for reasons I will get to after the synopsis. But the interaction between Bruce and Damian is the first thing of quality that this movie offered up that I enjoyed. It's interesting watching these two try to begrudgingly form a bond, because neither is really sure how to play the role that Talia has dealt them. Damian, for all that he's learned from the League, doesn't know how to be a child, let alone the son of Batman. And Batman has no idea how to be a parent, despite technically already kind of having been one. Look, when you take into account that Bruce has raised two orphans and acted like a close uncle to a third boy wonder prior to Damian's arrival, I think this narrative starts to fall apart a little bit. But logic be damned, their banter does actually endear me to these two characters and these two performances, which I'm not really a fan of either, actually, so we'll talk about that later. The father and son think that they're worlds apart, and in some ways, they are. But Damian is still very clearly his father's son. The two have a lot in common, and they act a lot alike. Both have to be stoic and in control. The dynamic between this duo is so perfect because their clashes come from the contrasts of the characters, but also from the comparisons there are to be made between them too. They argue because they're both thick-headed, stubborn, and feel that they always know what's best. But they also butt heads because they have completely different philosophies and ways to go about things. I especially like the scenes in which Batman is teaching Damian the importance of compassion. The two silently bond during these teaching moments. And what I kinda like about this pairing is that it's completely different from Batman's relationship with the previous Robins. With Dick, Jason, and Tim, Batman offered them training, taught them how to fight, taught them how to overcome victimhood and become a survivor, and furthermore, become a hero. But for the most part, Damian's already got his training, trained by the same league since birth that trained his father. Batman's not teaching Damian how to fight, he's teaching Damian how to live. His training of Damian is not how to be a hero, but how to first be a human. How to live life outside the costume, and how important it is to have a life outside of that costume. The further away he is from people socially, the more alien he is. If he wants to save people, he must live amongst those people. He must learn the significance of human life. If he wants to heal others, he's got to stop hurting them. I actually surprisingly really like this. Wait, did I just compliment Damian Wayne? Oh jeez, what have I become? Anyway, elsewhere Deathstroke and his League of Unextraordinary Gentlemen kidnap Dr. Langstrom and his family. As the pre-Bat man was previously affiliated and working with the original League. Slade takes over the project and forces Langstrom to do his bidding, as he wants an army of Man-Bat assassins. Because really, isn't that the American dream? Shortly thereafter, he also kidnaps Talia with ease, and I'm gonna pause it right here, because this is one of the things that frustrates me the most about this movie. It feels it has to discredit characters in order to build other characters up. Talia is captured with absolute ease, hardly putting up any fight and being taken by her captors in a matter of moments. This should never happen. Talia, much like her son, has been trained since birth on how to properly defend herself. She was literally born into a league of assassins. Like what? I get that Slade needed to take her hostage for the plot to progress, but the way they went about it makes her look weak. And ultimately, this turns what is probably the most highly skilled woman in Batman's rogues gallery into a complete damsel in distress. This is a pretty awful development. And it's not the only time something like this happens either, as I would even say Reyes' death in the opening was also very poorly handled. But hell, at least that guy got the chance to fight back. And to a lesser extent, Damian getting past Batman's security system so easily, and doing so without the world's greatest detective being able to spot him prior to finding him in Wayne Enterprises, is just kind of bullshit. Like, I get why all of this is done. You need to prove the abilities of one character by having them get one over on another established, seemingly greater character to truly showcase their abilities. But there are better ways of doing these things. I just think that everything comes too easy to too many characters. Damian tracks down the once thought to be loyal servant of Ra's al Ghul, Ubu, and when the big guy who betrayed his grandfather won't talk, Damian decides instead he'll die. And as he's about to take his life, at last second, who comes in to save the day? But Nightwing. Which, by the way, Nightwing here, looking a lot like his Young Justice counterpart these days. Not complaining, just commenting. Batman's oldest and youngest go head-to-head, with the older brother getting the best of his sort of sibling. And after the ass-whooping he hands out to the kid, he decides to drop some truth bombs too.
I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you could be Robin. Well, you can't.
You're damn right he can't, Nightwing! Look, I'm gonna be honest with you. I hate Damian as a character, but his dynamics and interactions with other characters is starting to wear on my hatred. I can't stand this little punk on his own, but given the right character to interact with, it really lessens my hatred. It almost endears me to the character. Damian and Nightwing genuinely act like bickering brothers from the moment that they meet. I enjoy this. I love this relationship. Wait, did I just say two good things about Damian Wayne? Oh god. Oh man, I don't know who I am anymore. What I enjoy far less is that directly after Damian almost kills a man, and then attempts to kill his older brother, he's punished by becoming Robin. I know the reasoning behind this in the story was that Batman needed to keep Damian close, but this lapse in logic feels really forced and really dumb. It makes Batman look like a fool for allowing him to take up the mantle, when within that same scene, Batman just scolded the boy and told him that he's no better than a criminal. But yeah, alright, let him be Robin, because the story demands it, I guess. That makes sense. Damian proceeds to prove that this was a mistake almost immediately, as he acts completely recklessly, and lands himself and his father into a whole heap of trouble. forcing this new team to take on the likes of League Ninjas and genetically altered man-bats. The team takes in Langstrom, no thanks to Damian who was attempting to kill him, and have him work on developing a cure. The Bat family rescues Langstrom's man family, but when they rescue the two, Langstrom's daughter delivers a message to Robin from Deathstroke. Deathstroke lures Damian to his hideout by promising to kill his mother should he not get there within a set amount of time. Something Damian of course keeps hidden from his father. But when the two do come face to face, Deathstroke winds up killing Talia, who jumps in the way of a bullet meant for her son. Aww, look at that. The Predator did have a heart. Aww. The Man-Bats are taken out with antidotes. Batman arrives just in the nick of time to save Talia using the power of the Lazarus Pit, as Damian and Deathstroke have a very violent, and I mean very violent, final battle. Both are stabbed, blood is shed. Honestly, it's a pretty impressive sequence, and I don't think my words can do it justice. Ultimately, Damian defeats Deathstroke, but refuses to kill him, holding to his father's teachings as opposed to his grandfather's teachings. Talia is saved, and her and Batman embrace, which, given the context, is kinda gross. Seriously, I hate this pairing. It is not great. Thank God we got to see that passionate consensual kiss between a man and his... What a wonderful love story. The place collapses and Talia goes her separate way to reform her father's league, while Damian decides to stay behind and learn under his father's wing. Talia relents, promising to return for her son someday. And that is Son of Batman. The movie is well animated, but like I said in my intro, the style just doesn't appeal to me. That's not to say it's bad, but just to say it's not really my taste. Not only does the style not really suit me, it doesn't seem like it suits the story that it's telling. Compare this to Batman Ninja, where the art style is very clearly, undoubtedly anime-inspired. It works there because the art complements the story that it's telling. It was an anime-inspired Batman story that utilized plenty of concepts and tropes anime fans were more than familiar with. The animation had a purpose. And I would even argue that the artwork in that movie added to the final product and made it that much better. But here, the style really serves no particular purpose. It's just a strange aesthetic choice that was made for this animated movie universe with no rhyme or reason. I do really like some of the visuals though. Not the character models or anything, but just like the basic imagery. Seeing Croc chained up in Arkham trying to snap at Batman while he stands an inch away from his reach, completely unfazed, was great. That is totally something I'd expect to see from The Dark Knight. I love that. But overall, visually, it's not really that appealing for me. And audibly, it's also not really that appealing for me. Here's the thing about this movie. It has a fantastic voice cast. The problem is that they're all fantastically miscast. For the most part, I kinda hate the voice acting in this. These just aren't the voices I'd expect to hear coming from these character models, and more so over these characters. Marina Baccarin, who I've loved in just about everything I've seen her in. Like, I mean, seriously, she's great. From Gotham, to Deadpool, to the original unaired It's Always Sunny pilot, she's always great. Or so I thought. Look, if I'm being honest, she's not bad here at all. But I guess I just expect a little bit more out of her as Talia. She ultimately just doesn't leave a strong impression. Far from the worst performance in the movie, but far from her best performance overall. I think it's serviceable, but a little bit forgettable. And as for Ra's al Ghul, wait, Giancarlo was Rage? Oh, gee. Man, I want to be out here singing your praises, but this is 2 times in the same month that you've let me down in an animated DC movie. You better fucking kill it as Professor X, or otherwise, quite frankly, I'm gonna start questioning my love for you. I don't all the way hate this one, but it does just feel like someone trying to sound vaguely like a Ra's al Ghul type. And half the time, for the short time that he's on screen, I will say that he succeeds. The other half of the time, Jason Mara isn't offensively bad as Batman, but he is offensively boring as Batman. It's just not the voice I want to hear out of The Dark Knight. I mean, in terms of delivery, I think he's mostly fine. I don't think he plays the part poorly, but it's the voice itself that just doesn't gel with me. Just not what I've come to expect from a Batman performance personally. I got more used to it throughout the runtime, but that doesn't mean it was making anybody's top 10 list anytime soon. I really hate Damian Wayne's voice actor. So I guess what I'm saying is that he's spot on. It was good. I don't know. I'm not going to be too hard on this performance because, much like the character, the actor was only a child at the time, and child actors aren't always exactly stellar. I mean, how many good kid actors can you think of? You got Shirley Temple, the kids from Stranger Things, and Macaulay Culkin. That's it. That's all of them. Every other snot-nosed brat put in front of a camera acted like they were in a third-grade play for My Fair Lady. Actually, if I'm being honest, it really does depend on the line. The performance does get good, but it isn't always. Especially in the first couple scenes with him, it just didn't work for me. But it did get better over time. There are certain lines here and there that aren't just said, they're felt. But I'm also not going to act like it was entirely consistent throughout. But let me talk about the worst offender here, Thomas Gibson, who's probably most famous for the incredible work he did in Criminal Minds, and who I originally first appreciated in Dharma and Greg. And yes, that is a show I watched when I was growing up, what of it? But here, Thomas Gibson is downright awful as Slade. He never once comes across as authentic. He just sounds like someone who's trying really hard and failing even harder. Out of everyone, I would probably say he's the most out of place. Because if I'm judging this as a Deathstroke performance, it greatly misses the mark. Gibson just can't emulate the casual, careless confidence the Swordman has. I think the best Slade Wilson portrayals make the character effortless in his bid to intimidate his foes. He's a master in all that he does, and because of this, he's audibly calm-sounding at all times. I'm not saying the man doesn't emote, but I'm saying the man doesn't wildly emote like he does in this movie. I mean, here, Slade is practically yelling at the top of his lungs and speaking in his over-the-top voice. The guy is just a ham and cheese sandwich in this one. Somehow, despite not having any physical presence, Gibson manages to chew the animated scenery around him. Was his only frame of reference for a Batman villain the 1960s show? Because if so, I would say that almost makes sense. So is Slade Wilson? No, this is definitely not a good performance. But if I was taking my knowledge and love for the character out of the equation entirely, then this is still a really bad performance. I'm sorry, Tommy. I know you can do better. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. This just isn't it for you. I can't tell if this was the wrong role for the guy, or he just needed to be in front of a camera rather than behind a microphone, but either way, this sucked. And it's not just the characters' voices that I take issue with, it's the acting itself. The dialogue feels mostly unnatural and sometimes stilted. The way lines are delivered feels so mechanical. Like the cast had one take to get things right, and the studio was secretly recording them when they were reading over the lines for the first time. Like, did they even know that they were being recorded and what they were saying was going into the final cut? Or did just nobody care? I will say, I think the exception to this for me is Nightwing and Alfred, which I thought in both instances the characters were almost completely out of place because of how good they were. So would I recommend Son of Batman? Well, yeah. Yeah, surprisingly, I think I would. Despite me not liking the animation style or some of the vocal performances from time to time, I think the dynamics within the movie, as well as the lessons learned from characters, really did a lot to endear me to the overall final product. Ultimately, I would say this movie is kind of a mixed bag. I mean, going into this, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. For the first 15 to 20 minutes, I loathed my experience. But past that, I started finding a lot of redeeming qualities. And by the end of it, I kind of feel like it broke even. I didn't hate this movie nearly as much as I thought I would, but I didn't love it as much as a lot of you guys said I would. There are parts of it I absolutely hate, but there are also parts of it I found myself really enjoying. I would not at all mind rewatching it, because I, for the most part, liked it. Didn't hate it, didn't love it, but I liked it. But the real question here is, do I still hate Damian Wayne? The answer? Yes, but with a little asterisk there. I don't like the concept of the character. I don't like the notion that Batman has to have his biological son become a sidekick and then eventually take the mantle from it. I think that there are far better characters to do so, and I will talk more about that in an upcoming video. I don't like the background of how such a character was conceived. I don't like the character. Except when I do. Damian isn't really an interesting character to me, until you juxtapose him with some of the other primary characters in the continuity. The developing dynamics between him and Bruce and him and Nightwing really have simmered down my overall hatred for this guy. And I think maybe, emphasis on maybe, I could eventually come around to not entirely loathing his existence. Maybe. Although, however, I am still very upset that the general public decided to take this boy in and love him for the same reasons that they hated my favorite Robin, Jason Todd. But okay. Alright, I understand. It's fine. That's just my own thing. Yes, I would absolutely recommend Son of Batman. I would warn you that the first 20 minutes are kind of a bat bomb, but past that, it's a bat, something good. Look, I can't always be clever. Actually, I can never be clever, but here we are. So if you haven't already, check out Son of Batman.
My grandfather taught me everything I need to know about personal combat.
Well, I was trained by Bruce Wayne, and every time they met, he kicked Ra's al Ghul's ass.
I'm once again checking out another Batman movie that I've yet to see. I've explained why in my Son of Batman video that I didn't watch this movie before, and if you haven't watched that video yet, I highly suggest checking it out before you watch this one. But the gist of it is blah blah blah, anime-looking Batman, I don't like anime, blah blah blah, I hate Damian Wayne, which is also another video that I made, and I suggest checking that out as well. But never mind that shit. Here comes Batman vs. Robin. And let me say right off the bat, no pun intended, man, I've really missed out on not checking this out sooner. This movie's opening is some of the darkest content I've ever seen in a Batman movie. Animation or live action. Like, this gives Batman Returns a run for its money. The bizarre doll maker, a giant ogre of a man, who dresses up in what looks to be stretched out children's clothing, and then hides his face behind a doll mask. Just based on appearance alone, this is deeply, deeply unsettling. And probably the scariest Batman villain I have ever seen in my life. But then add to it that the character is abducting children and replacing their body parts with weapons, turning them into his doll army, and that's just a heaping truckload of nightmare fuel that I did not ask for. It's welcome, but I just want to go on record and say I did not sign up for this. I did not put in my order. This is not something that I would have ever asked for. The character's also voiced by Weird Al Yankovic, who's really putting his heart, soul, and vocal cords into making this already deeply unnerving man that much more unsettling. The character looks nothing like the incarnations I've seen of the character previously, but then again, there was about a good 8 years of Batman comics that I stayed away from, so if anybody wants to correct me in the comments, you're more than welcome to. But as far as I'm concerned, this looks nothing like any incarnation I've ever seen of the character, though that's not a complaint, so much as it is a comment. Because yeah, this is a horrifying upgrade. I don't expect to see this guy in a Batman movie, I expect to see him in the next Twisted Metal game. My one regret about this is that this character very clearly could carry a movie of his own. And seeing him dismantled with ease by having his heart ripped out of his chest was a shocking way to start this movie. Suffice it to say, this ain't your grandpa's Batman. Hell, this ain't even your daddy's Batman either. This is a very shocking and dark interpretation of the character and the world that surrounds him. And because of that fact, instantaneously, I was smitten with this movie. I think the film does a really good job of establishing its leads, showcasing both Batman and Robin's particular abilities. And it does speak to the growth of Damian Wayne, as we actively see him attempt to put his vengeance aside in the name of justice. But he doesn't do so because of his own beliefs. He does so out of respect for his father's teachings. We also early on see that Robin isn't just some bloodlusting barbarian. Like his father before him, he's also quite the detective, managing to pick up clues on a case that his father had either overlooked or just frankly hadn't looked at yet. The one negative I will say is that the movie has a lot of Bruce getting his ass handed to him in order to progress the plot. And I get why this happens in the story, but it does make Batman look like he's lacking in the hero department, or at the very least, getting a little bit ineffective due to age. The banter between Batman and Robin is once again really good and really believable. I buy into this dynamic, and I buy into them being a dynamic duo. Batman is constantly trying to scold his son, but the typical father warnings come off as idle, as Damian, despite his young age, is smart enough to see through his false threats. Their brief moments of bonding are really heartfelt in their simplicity, but effective regardless. You can tell that Bruce really cares for the kid, even if he is a stuck-up, stubborn little brat who knows way too much for his own good. And you can also tell that despite being raised as the heir to a throne and not a child at all, Damian is desperate to live a somewhat normal life outside his costume. He wants a family life. He wants to be seen in public. He's constantly fighting the basic instincts Ra's al Ghul embedded in him in an effort to respect his father's beliefs, even if he himself doesn't fully believe in them. He does this out of love. And you can tell when Bruce doubts his son in any context, it actually hurts Damian. But Damian also doesn't know how to express these emotions in a healthy manner. So instead, he just takes out his angst and anger on the nearest party. Bruce believes the kid doesn't have a heart due to his rough exterior. That couldn't be any further from the truth. Damian's jealousy of Nightwing should be a big indication of his love for his father. Because despite taking over his old mantle and replacing him as Robin, he didn't replace him in his father's heart. I really love the sparring scene between past and present Robins, but man, this one shot is a thing of brilliance. Dick Grayson is literally holding Damian Wayne up to his old Robin costume, the same way that Damian's father holds him up to the standards of that same Robin. And this whole time, Dick Grayson is reflected in the glass up against his former image. This is such a blink and you'll miss it moment, but it's absolutely beautiful and breathtaking. There's so much that's being expressed here in just a few frames. I love this shot. What's happening physically is reflecting what the characters are going through mentally. And in just a matter of moments, their dynamic is played out for the whole audience to see. And I gotta tell you, I'm starting to get really tired of these movies changing the preconceived notions I had about later Batman lore. I always hated Damian Wayne, and now, because of Son of Batman, and even more so because of this movie, I'm starting to learn to tolerate him, and maybe even understand him. And it's not because he's a good character. Like, I stand by my hatred of his overall presence, but the character itself is a breeding ground for interesting concepts and dynamics in the world around him. So yeah, I have to live with that. But now, the Court of Owls gimmick that I've always hated from its inception is starting to wear on me too. They're the movie's main antagonists. And I gotta say, I think this movie depicts them far better than any of the comics that I've read with them in it. Now granted, I'm willing to admit that because I'm not a fan of them, I haven't read a whole lot of comics with the Court in them. I kinda tried to deviate away from their appearances. But nonetheless, with everything that I've read or seen, this is my favorite version of that secret society. There's so much going on with them in this movie that I had to pause and rewind several times just so I could collect my thoughts on the matter. First and foremost, the most interesting has to be Talon. And that is not by coincidence, that is by design. There's so much to compare and contrast with this character and other characters within the continuity. Now, Talon has existed in the comics before, but it's more of a mantle than it is a man, at least to my knowledge. There have been several Talons over the years, and this one is just kind of a combination of most of them. So this version of the character was created in a way that you could juxtapose him with the other characters in the story. Like Damian, he was trained since birth how to acquire his unique set of skills. He was trained by family on the wrong side of the general moral compass. He was brought into a league at a very young age and told to follow orders no matter what the cost. He was groomed to be in a top spot and lead an army of underlings. But then on the other side, like Bruce Wayne, he was pursued by a league of crafty individuals and lured into it by the love of the leader. Not at all unlike how Ra's al Ghul tried to induct Batman into his League of Assassins, using his daughter Talia. I think Talon really stands out here. The story tells you just enough about this character. It allows him to keep his mystique, but it also allows viewers to get a sense of who he is, why he does what he does. Despite the mysterious aura surrounding this masked man with a distorted voice, he is still very much a human being underneath that mask. We see his humanity break through his conditioning in intervals, at times questioning and second-guessing the decisions the council's made for him. He even fights against their orders and stands up for what he believes in. Despite being a trained warrior, the man is not a mindless mercenary. He's no drone even if they'd like for him to be. I would not mind seeing more of this specific Talon. Quite frankly, I think this is an overall upgrade to the character that I'm familiar with. While Bruce and Damian are having their monthly father and son spats, disagreeing on almost every aspect of crime fighting, the Court, or more specifically Talon, takes an interest in the sidekick, seeing him as the ideal protege, trying to get him to reach out and embrace the parts of himself that he's been trying to bury. I like that these two bond to some degree, and I can only imagine that Talon sees a lot of himself in the boy that he's mentoring. And then the movie makes it explicitly clear in this scene, but I actually wrote that line prior to watching this part of the movie. Talon is much more patient with the kid than the rest of the Court would ever be, eventually turning on his higher-ups when he's asked to kill Damian, completely turning against his code in favor of compassion. But that compassion only goes so far, apparently, as he then decides that he and his army of test-tube Talons will take on the Batman themselves after they learn of his secret identity, thus using Damian as bait for the Bat. But when the two come to blows, Talon gets his woodsy owl-looking ass kicked by the father and son duo, who take his meddling in their relationship more than just a little bit personal. It's clear that because of the bond the two have created, and because of the similarities they share, and likewise lives that they lived, Talon projects onto the boy, and believes he too would be better off without his father. Ultimately, Talon is defeated and dies at his own hand. And the father and son share a much-needed hug. Though Damian is still determined to find his own way, and branches out to a monastery in the mountains to seek his own path. What an impactful ending to an already impactful movie. There's a few things I want to point out outside of my synopsis that I was very much in favor of. The Court of Owls drew Batman, and he envisions Batman as a mass murderer, leaving behind bodies of those he loves in his wake. But then when that Batman unmasks, it's not Bruce. It's an adult Damian Wayne, his own son. I really like that they included Damian's Batman suit from the comics. Again, it's a nice touch. And at first, I actually mistakenly believed that this was a reference to Bruce's Elseworld father, Thomas Wayne. One more thing I liked, getting Kevin Conroy, the definitive Batman, to play Bruce's father in a flashback. There's not a lot to talk about here, but that was a good call. I like what you're doing there. This movie also gives us this amazing moment, which I have no words for, I just want you to see.
Now I'm only gonna say this once, you sons of bitches. Get the hell out of my cave!
But despite me piling on praise here, I do have some criticisms, critiques, and inquiries. So, let's get into those. Damian was born being taught to hold up honor, yet he openly gives his father his word and mentions his honor, but immediately discredits himself by doing the opposite and not holding up to either his father or grandfather's traditions. But to be fair, maybe this was the movie actually making subtle hints at the fact that neither one of their ways are his own. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's actually brilliant. I still have more, hold on. Young Bruce also taking out his vengeance on an innocent owl because he believed his family was killed by the Court of Owls? I don't know, that felt a little bit off and unsettling. And not the same way that the doll maker felt unsettling, that just felt wrong for the character. Don't tell me you wouldn't kill a murderous, rampaging, psychotic lunatic who has killed more people than he's let live, but then you gleefully shoot down a harmless, doe-eyed creature. I get it, Bruce is young and he's taking down what he feels the creature represents. This is symbolic of him going after the secret society that took his parents from him. I get it. I don't like it, but I get it. Also, later, Alfred's just out here slaying dudes in cold blood. I mean, sure, they're undead or whatever, but I still think that counts as living, considering they're alive. And also, Alfred doesn't know that. Alfred just comes in like, I'm gonna shoot first and let God ask all the questions. The Samantha heel turn was pretty obvious from the start for me. A new woman in Bruce's life when the Court of Owls show up? Yeah, obviously she's part of that team. But what was significantly more surprising was Talon turning on the court. And more so over, his love interest, also Samantha. I give this movie my highest recommendation. I'm really glad I watched it myself because this is now one of my favorite Batman movies of all time. Again, this also goes down as yet another Batman movie that Batman isn't exactly the focal point, but he's had more of a role here than he's had in the previous Batman films in which I've made that same statement, so it's fine. Batman doesn't need to be the main character in a Batman movie, but he does have to be one of the main characters in a Batman movie, at least as far as I'm concerned. This movie is great, and I cannot recommend checking it out enough. I don't even think that my words have done it justice. So go and check it out for yourself.
If Batman doesn't return soon...
I know. We all need to take off the mask sometimes. To remind ourselves that we're people underneath.
Dick Grayson.
Another day, another Batman video I've never seen. And that's why today, we're here to talk about the next in this lineup, Batman Bad Blood. Now, for the most part, I've pretty much enjoyed all of this animated universe's Batman offerings. They just seem to get better and better with each new installment. And I'm really curious to see if this movie can follow up on that. And let me answer my own question immediately. Yeah, it does. This movie definitely follows up on the last one. Not only in terms of quality, but even in terms of story threads. When Batman goes toe-to-toe with the Heretic, he's immediately reminded of his drug-induced nightmare of a twisted Damian Wayne from the future. And for good reason. Because the Heretic is in fact Damian Wayne. Kind of. He's basically an enhanced, age-advanced clone of Damian, who sort of embodies Batman's greatest fear, as well as Damian's own self-doubt. This dark Damian Wayne physically manifests what Damian buried deep inside, and what can only be described as a worst-case scenario for Batman. This version of the character was pretty much prophesized with the last two movies, and it's because of things like that within these movies that make me feel like this line of Batman films completed a narrative. Each completed their own narrative while still serving to create a greater narrative. This movie trilogy works so great because it seems like they had a working blueprint from the start. They had a vision and direction in mind before they put these together. And each movie seems like it's all been building up to this. Individually, these movies complete their own stories, but when watched side by side, they almost feel more like chapters in the same story. Unfortunately, the character is taken out of the equation pretty unceremoniously, which kind of diminishes the character as a whole, but on the other hand, it was a pretty shocking twist that ultimately adds to the careless and remorseless nature of Talia al Ghul, showing her as the ultimate unpredictable bad, lacking all compassion, empathy, and, well, humanity. It's a move that does help raise the stakes, and it keeps the viewer guessing. And it also proves to Damian just how expendable he is in his mother's eyes. For the first time ever, he understands how his mother sees him. And it's not as a son. It's as a henchman. Someone disposable. The love that he has for her is unrequited. Because all he is a League of Assassins project. One that she probably at this stage in life looks at as a failure. So there are some positives to come out of this. But it does feel like a little bit of a waste when the character only gets one meeting with Batman, a separate meeting with his younger self, and then he's slain. There was so much more that you could have done with this character. His arrival in this universe should drum up the same amount of discussion that was had when Damian arrived. When Damian entered everyone's lives, it changed dynamics. A new character had to factor into things. But here, Heretic isn't necessarily treated like a full-fledged character. Instead, he's more of a meaningless plot point. Because there's so many different creative things that could have been done, and now they're all just missed opportunities. Maybe seeing an adult Damian turn to the dark side would make Batman reconsider and question their partnership. Wonder what kind of influence he has on his son's life. And if this version of the character is really just predestined. Maybe he'd worry that the premonitions he once had were physically manifesting, and that Damian's betrayal was inevitable. Or hell, maybe you go the other route. Maybe Damian meets his older self and he too shares his father's fears. Maybe he doubts and questions himself until ultimately realizing that while the two are very much alike, they're not entirely the same. He'd come to realize that their differences make all the difference. Maybe you have old Damian trying to reach out and mentor young Damian. Maybe young Damian could defeat his older self. And their fight could be symbolic of the inner struggles that this character goes through. Who he is now facing who he used to be. I'm sorry, but there are just a lot of interesting routes this could have taken, and it just didn't. And that's a little disappointing. But to be fair, that is the first time that I'm disappointed by this series, so, they're doing good so far. And even with this potential negative, there is positive to come from it, so it's not an all-around L. It's like half an L. It's like a lowercase L. The movie really begins with a bang, but more accurately, a battle. It takes no time in delivering fast-paced action and fight scenes. And it also doesn't take its time in bringing in brand new characters to the mythos. Mid-battle, we're thrust into the plot, with Gotham City trying to survive in the wake of Batman's sudden absence. And I gotta say, watching a Batman project sans Batman just makes me feel like I'm watching a CW show. Except, better. Although, truthfully, I've always been fond of these types of stories to some degree. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Batman, but with the bat away, the family comes out to play. With Bruce gone, it gives so much more time and chance for other major characters to step it up, and here's no exception. We get to see a lot more of the characters fans know and love. I mean, what I really appreciate is that Nightwing plays a much bigger part here than he has previously in any of the other Batman films. With more importance comes more screen time, and with more screen time comes a more accurate portrayal of the character. And yeah, this is a pretty good performance. And due to this movie, I think it actually might be one of my new favorite Nightwing performances. I think Dick Grayson in this movie is really interesting. because he comes off as confident and cocky to a fault, yet serious and mature. It's like the guy knows that there's a time and place. He's still very much himself, but he's also fairly capable of donning the cape and cowl as well, even if I don't think that he should. But that's not a conversation for here, that's a conversation for an upcoming video. Bad Blood introduces the audience to two new members of the Bat family, that being Batwoman and Batwing. We don't get to know them intimately immediately. I mean, in Batwoman's case, she's brought in at the very start with very little explanation. The movie just goes,
"Look, it's me. I'm here. Deal with it. Let's move on."
As the plot develops, it's revealed that Batman kept a file on her, one that confirmed her identity as his cousin, Kate Kane. The file also reveals that Batman was unsure if he was going to take her in as a sidekick or take her down. In the case of Batwing, the movie kinda serves as his own origin story. This plotline doesn't take up too much screen time, but it's afforded just enough time to establish both the character and his motivations. Which is nice, because I always thought that Batwing was one of the most underrated characters in the Bat family. He's got some of the coolest looking gear in all of Gotham City, and it has advanced functions that would actually be useful. The only downside to the character is that he shares his superhero name with the name of Batman's jet.
Hey, Batwing. Need a ride in the Batwing?
Very funny.
I like both these characters, and I think that they were done justice here, but also done an injustice here. Both the characters were accurate portrayals, and they were performed very well, but I also feel like I could have used a little bit more time with each of them. It would have been nice to have them just a little bit more developed, and see them interact with the team a little bit more than they did. Regardless, I still enjoy it for what it was. Could have used more of these characters. Even if I think they're both hypocrites. Batwoman's constantly talking about not following Bruce's rules and not doing things the Bat family way and that she does her own thing. It's like, dude, that's totally cool. You want to live by your own moral code? You do you. That makes sense to me. But don't strap on the Bat emblem and then put on your little pointy ears and then act like you're not just copying off of what they're doing. If you want to be a part of the team, you gotta be a team player. Like, I get that she's saying that she wants to do her own thing, but I don't know, don't you think it's a little bit too late to do that? There's no copyright on crime fighting, but there probably should be. You know, Bruce, maybe it's time to consult the lawyers. And Batwing is every bit as bad, because Batwing is out here pissed off at the Bat family, blaming them for what's happening to his father. He still creates a mech suit that resembles that of a bat? I don't know, it just seems contradictory. But other than that little rant, I like these characters very much. And they're not the only ones. Mad Hatter gets to show off his skills while also showcasing his strangeness. They even bring Renee Montoya into the fold for a little bit. She doesn't do a lot, but it's nice to see her. We even get to see that Alfred still ain't afraid to throw down. I will never tire of seeing this butler go around to fisticuffs, or just straight up acting like he's Arn Anderson and pulling the Glock out whenever he can. But what I really, really like about this movie is that it truly does feel like a team effort. There's a real emphasis put on this team assembling and how they work together in Batman's absence. I enjoy it, I just wish we saw more of it. I'm glad that we're establishing an extended Bat family, but I'd appreciate it even more if these characters were actually used in other DCAMU films. This was a one and done for them. And speaking of the Bat family, that brings me to one of the few things I'm not a fan of in this continuity. And it's that in this version of events, it seems like there's only ever been two Robins. The current Batman, Nightwing Dick Grayson, and Damian Wayne. That means no Jason Todd, no Tim Drake. They never existed. It feels like an off choice given that this is in fact an extended universe and an appearance from them could have added to these stories and brought more star power and name recognition to them. These are beloved characters. Their presence would probably be appreciated. But no, I guess not. No Reds, I guess. I don't know, I feel like they definitely could have figured out something for them to do. It's a bizarre choice to just willingly skip over two of the most famous sidekicks in all of Batman lore. To this movie's credit, it does juggle around a whole lot and manages to do it in a fluid manner. You have to remember that this movie is acting as a retelling of two separate comic book series, with two separate stories. It's introducing a brand new villain, two new heroes, bringing back the original bad from the first two films, Talia, making Nightwing a believable Batman in his absence, establishing a new team with new dynamics, following up and completing arcs that started in the last two movies, while also attempting to make and tell its own story. And that's a whole lot to do in an hour and 12 minutes. And to its credit, it manages to pull it off with style. The one thing that's pretty interesting to me about this set of films, though, is that despite the movies being labeled as Batman movies, Batman is mostly secondary in them. He's like the Doug in The Hangover of this series. He's promoted and marketed as being there, but he's not really a main character. If anything, I would say that these movies are more Damian Wayne movies than anything else. And surprisingly, I really enjoyed them. I think this is a good lesson to always give new things a chance, because these wound up being some of my all-time favorite Batman films ever made. Movies about my least favorite Batman character, mind you. The fight scenes are unsurprisingly pretty awesome. They're well thought out, entertaining sequences. And if you look away even for a moment, you're probably gonna miss something. I wouldn't say that this movie was as great as the ones that came before it, but it's pretty damn good in its own right. And it still feels like a solid sequel to the last installment. I'm somewhere in between like and love with this one. So I would definitely recommend checking it out for yourself if you haven't already. At the very least, it is absolutely worth the watch.
Name. Now. Hush. It's true. He calls himself Hush.
He said it! He said it! I needed a new persona. My true identity had to be kept hush-hush. Oh, that's why they call it that.
And I've talked a lot about the DC animated movie universe, and I've also talked a bit about the Hush storyline in comics. And that's why today, I'm here to talk about the Batman Hush adaptation that's linked to that line of films. So with that being said, let's just get right into it. So I want to start off by saying Batman Hush does feel a bit different from the other Batman films it's attached to. Unlike the others, this doesn't seem to add to the overall overarching narrative. Rather than a fluid continuation, this feels like a separate standalone adventure that just so happens to take place in that universe. Which I suppose makes sense because the last 3 movies felt like they started and completed a story. So I guess anything after that would just have to be its own thing. There's nothing wrong with that per se. I guess it was kind of inevitable. But given the fact that this was the way this set of films ended, it makes it stand out from the bunch that much more. I've already spoken on the channel before about my problems with the original Hush story. But in my opinion, the movie suffers from a lot of the same problems as the original story. Because this was originally a comic book series and the series wanted to stretch its story out for as long as possible, the arc took a lot of unnecessary turns along the way, further convoluting the plot and bringing in more established names and faces to play minor and major parts that, for the most part, didn't really serve that much of a purpose. Despite attempting to condense the story, they still kept a lot of the elements that muddled that story up to begin with. While I think the movie did benefit from some cutting down of the original source, there was still more that probably should have ended up on the chopping block as well. And I think this story also suffers a little bit from not being able to play certain events out as they were done in the original comic. Major plot points are sped through, and at times it feels like I'm watching the plot on fast forward. Batman's traumatic injury is just over and done with immediately. It makes you wonder why they would even bother to include that into the story. So as an adaptation, I think it leaves a little bit to be desired. The idea that Riddler, this mastermind, this super genius, was able to determine the true identity of the Caped Crusader due to a skinny dip in a Lazarus pit has really always been a creative goof. Had the Riddler figured out that Batman is Bruce Wayne on his own, that information gain would have felt earned and legitimized the Riddler as a worthy foe, as well as Batman's intellectual peer. But instead they went the ancient magic by chance route, and it doesn't really do anything for the character. It adds nothing to his credibility as a true foe to the Bat, and it doesn't make him feel like a legitimate threat to Batman physically or intellectually. Ultimately, he's just a guy who got lucky due to Deus Ex Machina. When the movie's trying to be a faithful adaptation, it sucks because it's a faithful adaptation. But then when the movie sways away from the original story, they're creating entirely separate issues. They change Hush's identity, which kinda works, to be fair. I always said that Thomas Elliot randomly being introduced into the lore was kind of a dead giveaway.
Dead giveaway. Charles, thank you very much. Dead giveaway.
New villain shows up in town around the same time that Bruce's best friend shows up in town. Gee, I wonder who this villain is. So I think turning it around and using the character as a total red herring is actually a pretty clever move. And they cut straight to the chase by revealing that the Riddler is in fact Hush. And I think that's good in some ways because, again, you're cutting straight to the point. Riddler was ultimately the end reveal behind Hush, except he was working with Hush. This movie just cut out the middleman and said, the Riddler is Hush. That's not a bad plot point, until you start thinking about it. You see, the end reveal is that this new villain is really just an old villain with a makeover. What even is the point? I also have a hard time believing that the Riddler would be able to not tell anyone who he is. I'm not doubting his abilities to put together such convoluted schemes. That's spot on. That makes sense for the character. I buy that. But the idea that the man who can't help but leave clues behind, tying his crime sprees back to himself, instead of just being stealthy and walking free, would be able to commit these crimes and not seek credit and attention for it? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. He needs to be acknowledged. He needs to be validated for his genius. I can't imagine him not wanting to sign his initials on his latest proverbial piece of art. And if the intent was to have the Riddler be seen as a campy doofus, it's both a pretty bad interpretation of that character, but also a pretty poor choice to feature him as the movie's main villain. What's even worse is that the Riddler's first and only appearance in the series doesn't showcase him as the Riddler, but instead makes him Hush. And because of this end reveal really lacks all sting. We don't even get to know him as a character before he's revealed to be the big bad. So it's almost like there's nothing to this revelation. The shock is that he's not Thomas Elliot like he is in the comics. And the only way you would know that is if you were familiar with that story. I kind of feel like this movie expects its audience to have an understanding or knowledge of the material going in, and that's not exactly the best way to tell a story. If you have to go into a movie knowing what the original comic book was like to understand the movie, then you have failed at making a movie. His reveal adds nothing. It's just kind of like, oh hey, there's that guy that we don't know but we've seen once. I just don't think playing as a pawn in his own overall scheme while he was shrouded in mystery would really be on the table for the Riddler. And in that same vein, this is the Joker's first appearance in this continuity. And it doesn't showcase him as the Clown Prince of Crime, but rather an innocent victim in Hush's scheme. And yeah, I get it. I know that was his place in the original story as well. But first off, that was a mistake. And secondly, maybe you didn't hear me, this is the Joker's only appearance in any of these Batman movies. What a way to portray Batman's greatest foe. In terms of Damian, his cameo was hilarious. But after seeing how well he was utilized and how important and integral he was to the previous movies, it's a bit jarring to see him take such a back seat. I guess it's probably because Damian wasn't around for the original story, so he didn't have a place set in it, but you could have done something to incorporate him in. I mean, we're talking about the character whose back these movies were made off of. Wait a second. Wait, did I just defend Damian Wayne? I don't even know who I am anymore. There's one thing I'm really starting to dislike with these movies, and it's the random time jumps to fast forward through character arcs and relationships. The last movie pretty much drops Batwoman into the plot as a previously established character, even though she was not. And this movie does the same thing with Catwoman. Having Batman met Catwoman and started a relationship with her sometime in between movies. And I understand why this is done, because these are all stories that were previously made before that they're trying to fit into their own universe. So they're trying to get the timeline to catch up to the narrative. But it sort of feels cheap when this happens, especially when it happens as often as it does. I'm not knocking it, I get it, I'm just stating that I'm not a fan of it. They sort of do the same thing with the big reveal of who Hush is as well. But because of these jumps to random points in the timeline, sometimes these movies will set something up, and ultimately it will never really pay off. Batgirl was revealed at the tail end of the last Batman movie, and in here she has absolutely nothing to do. The character literally shows up for one scene before being completely forgotten about by the plot. She was just there to have a tiff with Catwoman over Bruce's nearly dead body, and then just like that, poof, she's gone. She showed up that one time, and then she showed up again, and then she just stopped showing up. And that's it. That is all the time we're afforded with Batgirl. There's never really a reason given for her sudden disappearance anyway. The story just stopped caring about her. And that's if it ever did care in the first place. But then again, some of the villains in this canon get that very same treatment. Here one minute, gone the next. I also find this movie to be a little bit of a weird follow-up to the last couple movies with the story, mostly for reasons I've already expressed, but also because this is yet another Batman story where Bruce gets incapacitated. Look, I like these movies, but at times it feels like these movies don't necessarily like Batman. I joke. But on a serious note, The Dark Knight has never taken so many L's in all of his days. Now don't get me wrong, this movie isn't all bad. There are a lot of elements that I really like about it. Like the previous films, I think the dialogue and interactions are well written. I find all of these characters to be accurate portrayals and fairly entertaining. And even a lot of the new additions to this universe kinda work here. I like how they put the Batman and Catwoman romance together. They complement each other very well, just as you'd expect and hope to see in a relationship between these two. They're a good team both in and out of costume. And it's nice to see this Batman flirt with the idea of a normal life with the woman he loves. But unfortunately, it doesn't pan out that way for our dear Dark Knight. The movie does a great job of showing us why these two characters work together, but they also end up showing why they wouldn't actually work together. There's a lot of love there. These two are so alike, and yet it's their differences that make this an unworkable situation. There's definitely love there, but they have different moral compasses and codes, different goals and motivations. They're the same in so many ways, but what ends up splitting them apart is where they're different. And yet, despite this, when they part ways, you get the feeling that they're not saying goodbye, but instead saying goodbye for now. It's the sad ending that this story was always going to build up to. And speaking of Catwoman, she is undoubtedly the major highlight of this movie. I would say the last three movies were really the Talia trilogy, so it's kind of refreshing to get something different. And Catwoman, like the thief that she is, steals the spotlight. I find this performance to be pretty good. I think the character here comes off as more woman than cat. You get a feel for the persona, but this movie is really focused on showing you the person. I think she's more open, honest, and vulnerable than a lot of the other Catwoman performances. Mainly because the story takes place in a point where she's attempting to make things work with Bruce. She's putting her image aside to let her humanity take center stage. And in response, Bruce is also trying to shed his rough exterior. It's kinda sweet and also tragic watching these two desperately try to meet each other halfway and manage to get torn apart when they realize they couldn't. My biggest issue with this movie is that while there are things done well here, they're the same things that were done well, and I would even argue done better in the previous couple movies. Overall, I like this movie substantially less than I like the ones that came out before it, but I have a really hard time having the same appreciation for this, because I don't like it when it's following the original story, and I don't like it when it's trying to do its own thing. Despite that, I don't think it's terrible. There are definitely a lot of elements that work to this movie that I would say make it worth the watch. And I could very well see other Batman fans enjoying themselves. I'm just not one of them. I would recommend checking this movie out for yourself to make your own opinion, because I don't think the movie's necessarily bad by any means, it's just bad for me.
Time to retreat.
I'm no coward.
Don't be stupid.
I've previously made a video talking about my least favorite Robin, Damian Wayne. If you haven't seen that video, it went a little something like this.
Wait a minute. I'm not gonna like this, am I? No.
You know, at the end of the day, you're asking yourself, oh, why is this person the right person for the role? Well, he is his father's kid. That's not a good enough answer. Now, granted, Damian does have the training to take on the role, but he doesn't have the right temperament. Damian Wayne as Batman it sounds wrong, and I feel dirty, and I want to shower and cry simultaneously. Damian is fucking annoying. Like, how? Just how, actually. I don't have a follow-up sentence. Just how? He's an angry, angsty little twerp who thinks he knows best all the time. With all that teenage angst, ego, and attitude, this guy just comes off as Diet Jason Todd. However, since making that video, I've been exposed to a lot more stories including, and more importantly, revolving around that character. And honestly, I stand by everything I said. Every opinion I had of this fictional child is still a matter of fact. I still think he's an annoying, angsty little brat who was rushed into the role of Robin. He was propelled into a position before even ever really being established. He was an unexpected, unwelcome nuisance, and he made more enemies than friends upon arrival. I stand by all of that. Damian Wayne is still all that I complained that he was before, but he's also a lot more than that too. While there are still problems present that initially make the character unlikable, I know now for sure that it's by design. Damian was never meant to win an instant popularity contest. He was kind of created to be the underdog in such a contest. He was devised to be disliked so he could be further developed. The character was never created to make a good first impression. And I think I kind of took that bad first impression at face value and made up my mind from there. The character on its own, to me, feels creatively lackluster. The new Robin is Batman's biological son and Ra's al Ghul's grandson? Oh, of course. I don't know, it just kind of feels a little bit contrived and lame. But then again, on paper, so does Superman. I mean, think about it. Guy has the superpower of having all superpowers. He's super fast, super strong, super lame. And he's basically indestructible unless you have access to green space rocks. You see what I mean? Saying something is different than actually seeing something in execution and watching it evolve in practice. Damian Wayne is very similar. His backstory and first appearances weren't really compelling to me on their own. I felt that DC just became creatively bankrupt and were just looking to make a big change to try to shake things up. So I avoided Damian Wayne's stories at all costs for a few years, paying more attention to continuities where he's either non-existent or just a non-factor. After taking notice of more projects including the character, I can say that Damian Wayne is different conceptually than he is in execution. And speaking of execution, I think that also plays a big part in the perception of Damian Wayne as well. The character's credibility is entirely dependent on who's writing him. Such a creation is very easy to get wrong. Like I said, he was created to be hated, at least at first. It'd be very easy to misidentify that as the blueprint of his character and overall signature trait. Trust me, I know. Speaking primarily outside the comics, I think there's a large spectrum for Damian Wayne performances. One that ranges from awesome to awful, with almost no in-between. Take, for example, the Injustice games, and actually, to a lesser extent, even the Injustice movie. Here, Damian just makes me think that the wrong Robin died. He is an angry, edgy little prick who grows up to be a less impressive Nathan Explosion in cosplay. He's so needlessly vicious and violent, it feels like I'm watching something from the 90s. We're talking about a die-hard, try-hard. This man is so edgy that you could cut yourself on his outline. The fact that they don't go into depth with his backstory takes away all redeeming factors the character actually carries. I think, once again, that's by design here because he is supposed to be on the bad guy's side, so we're not really supposed to sympathize with him, at least not initially. And to be honest, I never did, because this is the most annoying version of this character. Without his backstory, his need to disobey and go against his father's rules and teachings are just kind of frustrating. Like, it's like he's looking to branch out without any rhyme or reason. The guy's just very cranky, he's very moody. Even when he's an adult, he still feels like a teenager in an adult's body, which is infinitely worse. Because now he has the power of a man, but the mindset of a boy. A very dumb boy. Very dumb, hateable boy, who just looks like a man. In the Harley Quinn show, they kind of play with the perception of Damian being the hateable wannabe. It's clear that they're capitalizing off the vocal Damian Wayne haters and naysayers. He always thinks he knows better. He's always trying to show his maturity. Instead, you just want to, shove this twit in a locker. So there is a negative depiction of this character that is present. And I feel like it completely confirmed my own biases and affirmed all that I knew about this character to be true. So like I said, it's easy to get wrong, but it's also easy to go a different route with the character. But if you get it right, he has the potential to be downright fascinating. It's interesting seeing the compare and contrast between he and his father, as well as one between he and his grandfather. He's both in danger of becoming his father and becoming his mother's father at any given moment. He takes on both their mannerisms and both of their ideologies, which creates an inner turmoil and a struggle between their two teachings. Damian lives in a state of constant conflict, not just with the others around them, but within himself. And yeah, he may come off as a cocky little twerp, but he has some serious secretive self-doubt. He questions all of his actions, wondering if he's truly doing the right thing, or just doing what he's told. Ultimately, you have a Robin who's not only fighting the harsh evils of Gotham City, but also the evils within himself. There's a very compelling three-dimensional character in there if you just get past his admittedly rough exterior. And when that front comes down, what you're left with is a very sympathetic character. Maybe more sympathetic than any other Robin that came before him, with the obvious exception of Jason. Damian creates a completely unpredictable environment for both the characters in the story and the audience watching it. You never know when or why his allegiance might change. And since he's still developing, you never know what side he'll ultimately end up on. He might be putting in the groundwork for column A, but you might find that the story ends in column B. It's easy for me to imagine the character going either way. Damian's emotional immaturity and rough upbringing make him a danger for all those around him. Because despite his intelligence and skill, we see that he's not immune to manipulation. Actually, he's pretty prone to it, choosing the wrong people to look up to and have faith in. His greatest teachers are questionable at best. But what I like most about Damian is how he affects the world around him. His introduction does exactly what I believe was intended. It shakes things up, and in a big way. It creates new and interesting dynamics in its wake, with the other Robins taking on more of a big brotherly type role to this newcomer. And his arrival also allows the comics to showcase Bruce as a father more. Now granted, he's essentially both Dick Grayson and Jason Todd's adoptive father, while also taking on a bit of a father figure role in Tim Drake's life. But I feel like often this is forgotten in favor of showing him as a mentor, with some dad-like tendencies, if that makes any sense. One of the absolute best things to come from Damian's inception was the connections he made with a lot of the other members of the Bat family. His banter with Alfred is almost always brilliant, as their perceptions of each other is pretty off, but also sometimes pretty on the money. Because he and Jason are so similar, often they clash and butt heads. Sometimes they're downright at each other's throats. And the jealousy Damian feels toward Nightwing is not unlike a real-life sibling rivalry. He's the younger brother looking to get his parents' praise and attention, and he can't help but envy his older brother who seemingly has done that. For all the training he's had drilled into him since birth, being raised not as a child but as the heir to a throne, he was still always written to be a person. And not just a person, but a kid. A lot of the time, the previous Robin's ages were neglected outside of a random mention. They were there and they were young, but they didn't always act their age. Damian here, however, certainly does. He has more energy and agility. He's usually depicted as being just a little bit faster than everyone else around him, and I can't help but wonder if that's because time hasn't slowed him down yet. While youth definitely has its advantages in comparison to some of the older members of the family, it's not always something that's in his favor. As I said before, he's prone to mind games, and has a hard time dealing with and sometimes even interpreting his own emotions. Suddenly, this kid constantly acting up and acting out makes a whole lot more sense. The blemishes in character aren't creative blunders, they're humanizing traits that highlight a tortured psyche within someone who doesn't have the time or tools to effectively deal with them. Psychologically, you gotta think that this kid is shattered. Born to two crime-fighting families at war with one another, has forced him to live with a moral compass that points in two opposite directions. And yet, despite this, he tries to push through the righteous fog and do what's right, even when it's not clear to him. Pursuing justice just as his father before him had. Eventually learning to not just blindly conform to either Bruce or Rage's beliefs, but instead find his own. Damian fights for innocence in every form, especially with him becoming the voice of the animal kingdom all of a sudden. And I think this really emphasizes the character's compassion and gives him his own unique interest in important cause. Traits like this help map out the blueprint of this hero's soul. At times he may be a bad kid, but he's a good guy. And I think that's surprisingly beautiful. And aesthetically, if you can get over the fact that sometimes he's drawn to look like a garbage pail kid, he's got a pretty cool look. I think I've already mentioned this before, but the guy undoubtedly has the best looking gear out of the many Robins to come before him. I mean, seriously, who is his tailor?
I took the liberty, sir.
So in complete honesty and transparency, while I don't believe that he's the best Robin, I do think that he is a very valid one. He's earned his place in the Batman family, and you know what? He's not so bad. If you hate Damian Wayne just like I did, I'd suggest maybe giving him a second chance. After all, he's only a kid. With all that being said, if you like this video and want to see more Damian Wayne content here on the channel, Let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
Poor little Robin.
I've been your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.